Hello, welcome to the next session of CSS for Dummies. In this session, we're going to talk about something called CSS Selector called ID. Now, previously, we talked about the simple name tag selector and the class selector. Okay, this is similar to that, but this time we're going to use something called ID as a selector to identify various tags on which CSS needs to be applied. Let me show you how we do that. So, if I jump inside my VS Code, okay, so this is the file we used previously. Let me try to resave it in terms of now session 7 and then CSS Selector ID .html. Again, we are saving all our files as HTML so that we work with that. Even though we are working with CSS, all our basic root file goes as HTML. Now, once we have that available, in previous session, we talked about this .news as a class name. Okay, and then we use an attribute called class in our CSS. Okay, so we use attribute called class. However, there's one other attribute that we can use. For example, in this list item, I can use an attribute called ID, and ID I can specify, for example, my list. Okay, so now this list item has an attribute associated with it called ID, and we gave it a name called my list. Okay, this is same as giving it a class name or a name, but this time because we have used an ID here. And remember, ID is an attribute that we typically use to identify each indifferent list or tag name, and then this ID is most commonly used in terms of JavaScript. Class is something that we most commonly use with CSS for styling, but because ID is there, we can use ID with CSS as well. Again, ID is an attribute usually commonly associated or used with JavaScript, and class is basically we use with CSS. However, both can be used interchangeably, no problem with that. Okay, so if you use an ID tag for some reason, what we do, how we access this in our CSS. So again, under the style tag in our head, we use with the attribute instead of using now hash, we use my list. So instead of using dot, we use something called my list. So now in our style tag, what we do is, previously in a class we use dot operator. This time we're going to use something called hash my list, and then we're going to specify some attribute names to it. Okay, so what we're going to tell this time is that there is an ID called my list. So this ID identifier is hash. So for a class identifier, we use the dot operator. The dot operator is used to identify that this is going to be a class, whereas if you want to use an ID, basically you have to use something called hash, and then the ID name, in this case my list. So basically it means that within our HTML there is a tag that has ID called my list. So what do? You apply these styles to it. So whatever styles we apply will be applied to any tag that has this my ID as a my list as an ID. Okay, so if I save it, go and view the code. So if I just go live again, and let me show this message again. So if I go back inside my code and here, so you can see that this particular tag has now green color with white. So previously all was there. So I can even say alignment. This can be, for example, left. Control S, go to my code. So now this tag alone has a left alignment. So this is a list item that has an ID associated with it, and now I can control individual tags based on my ID or my class. So this becomes the second way of, or third way, sorry, of using it. So one is that we specify selector as a simple class name or tag name. Okay, so tag name is there. This tag name becomes a selector. Second is the using a class name dot with a dot operator. So class, if you are using class name, you specify the class. Now this class is something that is heavily relied on in Bootstrap framework or in Tailwind framework. We will be talking about this later throughout this course. So you would be coming across this course in which we will be talking about this thing. So keep an eye on that. I will be using class and ID now for all other reference examples throughout this course. So we will be revisiting and reusing it again and again. Don't worry about that. But this is what does. So what we do in Bootstrap is that there's a predefined classes created for us. We just give it a class name, and boom, the effect is automatically applied. Here again, same thing has happened. So we have created a style that does this thing. Now wherever we want to apply that, we use in terms of either class or in terms of an ID. So if you use a hash, it basically becomes an ID. So any tag that has this hash. So for example, in this ID, I can go h2 ID, and it can be, for example, my list. Control S. If I go back, so this H2 now has the same attribute as the this list item. So this is what CSS allows us to do. So if you use attributes, you use styles, you can apply styles on any tag. It doesn't concern which tag you're applying as long as you have provided the correct selector. Sometimes it's excellent, but sometimes it can get very confusing as well. So do ensure you provide a correct selector. So in this case, the selector is ID, not the H2. Okay, so now H2 is not there, it is ID, and my ID is my list. Okay, the final thing we can do in selector as well is that we can use same attributes or assign same style to multiple attributes as well. So for example, I can go and say list item space anchor a tag. Okay, and then I can specify certain attributes to it. Now I can use this as well. So what I've done here is that I've specified that there is a list item space and then anchor tag and space. For example, I can say, hey, it can be, for example, any other tag as well. So in this case, maybe I can use H5. Okay, so all these are going to have this thing. So I can use them as, for example, 50 as a font size, 150 as a font size, and color can be completely different, or whatever style I want to apply onto them, I can use with that. So what this basically means that every list item, every anchor, every 5 have the same attributes. So this is like sharing your selector attributes with multiple as well. So this is the fourth way of applying a selector. So you can use multiple tags, which is usually not recommended though, but if you want to just a generalized thing, you can use this in a simple way, but it's usually not applied. If you want to create a general tag behavior, sometimes we also have this thing available. You can use as a simple hash sign. Okay, so now this basically means that apply it on every tag. So this basically will mean that this becomes the default attribute of every single tag. Okay, again, to certain extent we use it, but sometimes we don't recommend it because now you have set a default tag style for all the tags. Okay, which basically not recommended. We want to customize everything, but certain times some people would have this behavior in terms of, for example, we setting a margin, for example. Okay, so I can say margin, maybe margin in terms of margin margin, and I want to apply a style 0 pixels. Okay, this basically means that remove all the margins of all the tags and just use this default 0 values for it. So maybe for every tag we want to start off with a default value of this tag, kind of a thing, that for every single tag by default set a margin to 0, and then you can further go and customize it. Because you want to further go and customize it, do ensure that if you are using it, we put it as a first style on our under the style tag. Okay, what this means that because HTML is an interpreter based, the browser will interpret our code line by line. So it will go and it will read the first and execute, then second and execute. So first it will set the margin to 0, then you can go inside each individual tag and set a custom margin, but again it depends on how you basically use it. So you can use a hash to apply on every single attribute. You can use tag name, you can use the class name, you can use the list name, or you can have a nested or the multi tag selectors where you can specify multiple attributes to your tags as well. And then there are few other secret ways that we will go and explore with more advanced features of CSS as we go and explore CSS more in depth. So for now, these are 3 to 4 standard methods of using CSS selectors, and we will be exploring them much more detail in every single class from now on, so don't worry about that. So I hope you understand here that okay, you can use class, you can use ID, you can use a tag name to specify CSS, and then now let's start to explore this CSS much more in detail in next classes. Okay, so see you in next class.